Hello, my name is Jack Reall with Spec Rescue International. Today on the Spec Show, we're going to be talking about the 3 types of cutting torches commonly used in the rescue environment. Before we get to the torches, I need to go over the minimum PPE we're going to use for cutting metal. First, we need high gauntlet welder's gloves. Second, we need grade 5 welder's glasses, a helmet, and an FR or leather burning jacket. Before we get started cutting metal, we need to set our pressures on our regulators. We're going to start with our tip chart here and identify the pressures based on the size tip we have on our cutting torch. We're going to go to our oxygen cylinder and open our oxygen cylinder and set our pressure to the appropriate pressure as identified on the tip chart. When we open our fuel cylinder, in this case acetylene, we're just going to crack the cylinder about a half turn and then set our pressure on our regulator to the appropriate pressure as identified on our tip chart. Okay, starting our oxyacetylene torch. We're going to start with our fuel valve, and we're going to open our fuel valve just slightly. Then we're going to light the fuel coming out of the tip of the torch. Once we see the fuel coming out burning, we're going to add fuel with our valve until the smoke goes away from the flame. And once we have no longer any more smoke, we're going to stop adding fuel and go to our oxygen. And we're going to add oxygen slowly until we see bright blue cones coming out of the tip of the torch. When we get those bright blue cones well defined, we're going to push on our cutting lever and see if they change. If they don't change, then we're good to start cutting metal. If they do change, we're going to add a little bit more oxygen until they don't change again. One important factor here is if we put too much oxygen into it, you can see our tips get pale blue and the sound goes to more of a hiss. So we want them bright blue, well defined, with a slightly roaring sound and no change when we add our cutting lever. Now, when we start cutting our metal, it's important to stabilize our torch. The back hand controls the cutting lever, the front hand stabilizes the torch. We're going to approach the metal, preheat the metal without the cutting lever. Once it gets bright orange, we will apply the cutting lever lightly and start burning through the metal. As you can see, I'm moving at a fairly consistent speed, which is very important to ensure that we do not have slag attaching the metal behind the cut. Okay, for shutdown of our oxyacetylene torch, we're going to start with our fuel, and we're going to shut our fuel off first, and then we're going to shut our oxygen off. And now we've completed our burning with an oxyacetylene torch. Next up is our Oxy Propane Torch. Again, we're going to set our regulators as indicated on our tip chart for our oxygen and our propane. Next, we're going to deal with lighting the torch. You'll notice that the Oxy Propane setup we have here is a combination head, which means this top part can come apart from the regular valve body. What that means also is that we have 2 oxygen valves. As with the combination head on our oxyacetylene torch, we need to eliminate one of these valves, and we're going to start with the bottom one. We're going to open the bottom oxygen valve all the way and keep the top one closed, and we'll use the top one to regulate our oxygen flow. Now we have a fuel valve, an oxygen valve, and our cutting lever that we'll deal with. Startup of our Oxy Propane Torch is similar to our oxyacetylene torch. Starting our Oxy Propane Torch, we're going to start with our fuel valve, and we're going to open it slightly, maybe an 1/8 to 1/4 of a turn. We're then going to light the fuel, and you can see it's got a very light flame coming out. Now we're going to add oxygen using our oxygen regulating valve until we see very bright blue defined cones at the tip, just like with our oxyacetylene torch. We're going to add more fuel till they go away, add oxygen till they come back, add fuel till they go away, add oxygen till they come back, and then add fuel And if we don't see any change by adding fuel, we are set at the appropriate burning temperature. Now we can start cutting metal. Again, the same with our oxyacetylene. We're going to move to our piece of metal, preheat the steel. Once it gets bright orange, then we're going to apply the cutting lever lightly and move our tip at a very consistent speed, burning through the metal. And if we stay consistent, we should not have slag behind the metal. Shut off of this torch is very similar to the oxyacetylene. We're going to shut our fuel off first, then our oxygen, and we've completed our cut with our Oxy Propane Torch. And finally, we're going to burn with our Oxy Gasoline Torch, commonly known as the Petrogen. The Petrogen has a liquid fuel tank, safety can, that will pump up similar to a Coleman lantern to create pressure. Liquid gasoline flows through our red hose all the way up to our Petrogen torch. This torch is very effective in cutting thicker steel and steel with air gaps in between. Again, we're going to look at our tip chart, which is normally contained on the side of the can for the Petrogen. We're going to check it out. We're going to pump up our can to the appropriate pressure, which is usually right around 20 psi, and it pumps up, again, just like a Coleman lantern. Once we get to 20 psi, we're ready to start burning. Okay, on the Petrogen, our lighting procedure is a little bit different than our other two torches. The Petrogen tip will stay in contact with a piece of steel while we're lighting it to help with vaporization of the liquid fuel that's coming up through here and going out the tip. We're going to start off with oxygen. 1/2 turn of our oxygen cylinder valve until we hear oxygen flowing. Now we're going to go to our fuel valve, which is at the bottom of the torch head, until we see vapor coming out of the end of the torch. Once we get that, we're going to light it, and we're going to leave that torch head in contact with the steel at a 45-degree angle. That allows the heat to come back into the torch head to help vaporization. Once we get rid of all the orange flame, the dirty flame, we're going to add fuel with using the valve until we get these bright orange starbursts coming out of the tip about 1.5 inches long. And if you move the tip along the steel, you can help see those orange starbursts. Now, cutting with our Petrogen torch is the same as our other two torches we use. We're going to preheat the steel, and then once it gets nice and orange, we're going to use the cutting lever and move just long using a consistent speed to cut through our steel. Okay, the shutdown procedure for the Petrogen. Very important to get this one right. You have to turn the fuel off first. If you turn the oxygen off first, liquid fuel will pour out of the end of the tip onto our hot metal and catch on fire. So the fuel has to be turned off first in the Petrogen. Very important. Once that's done, we'll turn off the oxygen and the torch is complete and we've done our burning. And for the Spec Show, this is Jack Reall. I hope what you've learned today through this video will help you in your future endeavors with cutting metal, whether it be the rescue environment, training environment, or just plain cutting metal for around your home. Thank you.